live.
Pardon me? Yeah.
No.
So like I looked like 2 minutes before I wanted to go live. Like suddenly all this whole program said like it doesn't recognize my microphone. So I was all like in panic mode, checking all these systems and everything else. But luckily, like I had to reboot the whole thing. So
we're here. It's good.
It's working, right? So
cheers.
Oh, you got your tea. Hey, oh, that's good on you. What do you got in your tea? Is it like regular?
It's coffee.
Fair enough. Well, if it's 8 a.m., then yeah, you definitely need coffee then. Yeah, I drank a cup of coffee when I was 8, like one sip, and told myself like never again. I'm never drinking coffee ever again.
That's a fair point. I never thought I'd be a coffee person, but it just happened. So here I am.
Some people actually tell me like I don't trust a person that doesn't drink coffee. Like, do you trust people that don't drink coffee?
I trust everybody. That's probably.
Oh, that's good. Oh, like I don't know. I asked a question a while ago
because of like the late night study sessions. That's the only reason I started drinking it.
Right, yeah.
Last year, it went crazy.
Like, luckily, like I did not need coffee when I went to law school. It was.
Can't relate.
I don't know how I survived. It was one big blur. That was it. But yeah, other than that, it was. Yeah, maybe it was those energy drinks. Even like those energy drinks, I didn't drink too much of those though. But yeah. All right, we got Jocabed as well.
Hello.
How you doing?
Well, I'm fine, thank you.
Sweet. So we're in a bit we'll be joined by Agnes from Kenya and Kenneth Deer from Haudenosaunee, both New York, U.S. and as well as Canada. But I probably should start with some like the whole introduction show thing, something that they usually do when they do like shows, right? Yeah, this is like the second time that I do this, so it's still very uncomfortable, unnatural to me, but I'm just going with it anyway. So this is tea time with myself. I'm Ghazali Horella. I'm from Maluku. If you don't know where it is 999 islands between the Philippines and Australia. 2 million indigenous people living on those islands. And I'm a product of one of them. And I've been working at the UN with indigenous peoples in the indigenous movement for the Alifuru people, which is my indigenous affiliation, for I think almost 18 years now, and made a lot of friends and grew into the movement. And so when the whole COVID-19 thing started happening, we were all like in organizing mode because like the permanent forum was about to happen, and like the whole political year expert mechanism, climate change meetings were all scheduled. I was in a meeting on oceans when all this we all went into lockdown, and I wanted to stay in touch with everyone and to try to find out how they were doing. And everyone asked me like, I want to know what these peoples in the rest of the world are, how they are doing. Because like we're all in lockdown and all in our social in a bubble, and we had to like deploy social distancing. I figured like, hey, maybe I should like host like conference calls or Zoom calls. So that's what I did. I hosted Zoom calls, and we figured, and this topic that we're going to discuss today, human rights and rule of law in a national context, and the implications of COVID-19 on the rights of indigenous peoples, is something that was one of the first things that was brought up. And actually, one of the guests on this show, today's show, was the person that brought it up, Tom Skinner from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and some other topics that we wanted to discuss further. But like it was a 2-hour conversation that we had, and yeah, we just didn't have enough time. So I decided to have like dedicated calls or dedicated conversations on these topics, and allow other Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples to participate in that discussion. So this is all new to me. As you might have seen yesterday was a good session. We talked about the implication of COVID-19 on international processes. And today I'm joined by not the least persons. Here we go. And boom, Kenneth as well. So we got Charms Kenneth from Aotearoa, Jocabed from Panama, and Kenneth. I asked him to be on the show for probably last minute, so he's probably still had to wash his face and comb his hair, just like I did, just like I had to. So thank you so much for Kenneth for being part of this at a last minute notice. Yeah, so this is like a normal couch conversation, nothing too fancy. Just speak your thoughts, and the people that are watching either through YouTube or Facebook, you can right now start typing in where you're from, where you're watching from. And yeah, yes, Charm is having a cup of coffee. I'm having a cup of tea, and just show us that you're having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee as well, or water, whatever you want to do. So it is it should be a very interactive conversation, and not just the four of us or the five of us. Agnes will be joining us as well, but it's like a five of us conversation. That's not it. It is a global conversation. So I think I've spoken way too much right now, because there are at least 3 people on the screen that have a lot. They're much more interesting than I am. So please, yeah, Charm, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself, because I can do it, but that wouldn't do it any justice. So Charm, go ahead.
Kia ora, everyone. My name's Charm Skinner. I'm from Aotearoa. Last year, I had the privilege of being one of the 35 Indigenous Fellows with the OHCHR, and I'm in my final year of university at Auckland Law School. A bit about me before we start talking. So, I come from a pretty stereotypical kind of family where a lot of the colonialization that's happened in our country has really badly affected my family. So everything that I do now is to ensure that, future kids like myself don't have to go through those kinds of things. So my whole education has been wanting to make things better for our people. And so last year I was really it's my first time at the UN, and it was a lot of learning. But now I realised how important it is for me as a Maori in New Zealand. I live in a first world country, and I can get up on an international world stage and talk, and I won't be prosecuted or harmed like my other brothers and sisters around the world. So I guess that kind of leads me to where I want to start is, I think one thing that we have to be very mindful of during this time is, while we're all in this pandemic with how do we help our families and so forth, we need to make sure that we're tracking what states and governments are passing under the radar, because while we are consumed in looking after our people, there are going to be agendas that are still being pushed forward, and that goes back to our human rights being breached. When we're so caught up in trying to stop more harm from happening, it's us who are still going to be affected in other ways. So I really think I wanted to start the conversation with, again, talking about when there's future decision-making processes that are going to happen after this, we as Indigenous people need to be at the centre stage making all of those decisions. None of what I'm saying is new to anybody, but I think given the current climate that we're going through at the moment in the world, this is our time to really push. And I think one of the action points that I really want to hone in on is, we have all of these experts around the world in different fields. We've got our people on the ground who can best tell states and governments what's happening. And this is a time where we really need to pull that all together now to make an impact, because this kind of time period isn't going to come around again, but we all know that it's our people who will be hit hard after this. So I think for me, what I wanted to talk about today is really ensuring that we're thinking about steps forward after this pandemic is over. We need to start seriously thinking about it, because it's something that I worry about, for all of us around the world. So open to kōrero with everybody. I know I'm a newbie in this world, but I'm learning.
Well, I appreciate it, Charm, and I'll also thank you for outlining what your expectations are and what you would like to get out of this conversation, because that is a very good way of honing the talk that we have at this point. Kenneth, were you able to comb your hair and wash your face? Or do you need a little bit more time, maybe? That's me asking the people. Yeah, introduce yourself, please, to the few people that don't know you.
Here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Okay, all right. This is the first time on this platform, so I'm not sure how it works. Well, thank you, Ghazali, for inviting me, and I felt sorry for you, so I accepted the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Okay. My name is Kenneth Deer. My name in my language is Jahayandu, or a Mohawk. And my community is Ganawage, which is in Canada, within the borders of Quebec. Mohawks are on both sides of the border, both in Canada and the United States. We're part of the what's known as the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Six Nations Confederacy, and we call ourselves the Haudenosaunee, which means people of the Longhouse. And I've been kicking around the United Nations for a few decades now, and I met Ghazali out there, and I probably met this other young lady that spoke. We probably met at the AMRIP in the summer, or maybe even at the Human Rights Council. So anyway, it's nice to see you, and I always like to hear young people speak, and also follow through on the training and the experience that they received in Geneva. So it's nice to see them. And we in my trial over the years, I've seen a number of people who started out there as a fellow and then continue their work, and it's nice to see them to carry on and not just fade away into the sun. To do someday soon. So with this phone call, though, we were talking. I think the objective of this is to talk about the rule of law and what's happening with Indigenous peoples during this pandemic, and there are dangers that we can see besides the obvious ones to our health and well-being, but also we see the states. Some states trying to take advantage of the situation and pushing through, in particular, extractive industries. Pipelines and oil extraction are continuing and unabated. Whereas in many places, there's supposed to be social distancing, and there's supposed to be, businesses are supposed to be shut down and closed. However, that doesn't seem to apply to industries that are continuing to extract natural resources from our territories, and also or pushing through pipelines. So we have there is a problem here, because the COVID-19, our people can't be out there protesting. In large groups, you get arrested. For one thing. Secondly, is you'll get you're endangering each other should any one of us be infected and spreading it unknowingly. So we have we seems to be handicapped. It seems like in ordinary times we have one hand tied behind our back, and right now it looks like we have two hands tied behind our back. So when we can't, one of the only things we can do is protest, and yet we can't even do that in this in the condition the world is in right now. So when it comes down to the rule of law and the struggles that Indigenous people have, we're in a difficult situation in this particular pandemic. So I'll leave it like that for now.
No, thanks so much, Kenneth. I'm sure that we'll come back to everything that you said as well. Jocabed, please introduce yourself to everyone, and how are things over there in Panama?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jocabed. I am Jocabed from Panama, from Kuna Yala people. We are from the Caribbean Sea. We have around 365 islands. And then my people, we have people in Panama and Colombia. Nice to meet you. I'm working with indigenous community. I am Kuna people. We want to compile, record, and write the history and memory about our ancestors, how we resisted in many centuries. And then I am very happy to be here because we want to share about what happened with our people, what we are doing in this moment with the pandemic. It's only, this is it's not my second language. For that reason, my English is not really good, but I try to speak. If you don't understand me, you tell me. I can speak slowly. Nice to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jocabed. Of course, I've already been getting questions actually. Why is this show not in Spanish, French, and or Russian? Like I've been only like in one episode in, and already people are asking why this is not in all UN languages or the language that these people understand. Yeah, well, my Spanish is not as good as I want it to be. Maybe I can order a beer in a bar, and that's probably it. But definitely, and there's some people actually that are very keen to participate in this conversation. Thank you so much for Jocabed for participating in this conversation, because I think it's very important that these peoples around the world know that they're not alone in this, and that that we are communicating between regions and between peoples. And also between languages. We try to overcome language barriers. And if I or Chorum or Kenneth are speaking way too fast, just say so, and we'll slow down a little bit. It is. I am notorious, as in like people know me for being a machine gun when I talk. So I also have to be very aware of slowing down a little bit. So I think that's why I call it tea times, so that I, from time to time, I just take a sip of tea, so that people can actually catch up to what I was saying, if it made any sense or not. Jocabed, can I stay with you a little bit, because you said you wanted to explain about like the situation of your peoples. So I think that will be a very kickoff to the conversation about how is the situation in the countries.
Okay, yes. I want to talk about the context about my people. The greater ethic of the Kuna people is the common good to live together well. In this end, I would like to share about how we can do again to the pandemic. I want to talk about political, economical, spiritual, and social. In the political, before the Panamanian government will make the decision that all Panama be in quarantine, the Kuna Yala people began quarantine. Because we understand the importance of lives, and we understand the importance to prevent the pandemic is coming to Kuna Yala. In the economic, the community began to make product exchange with other communities as part of the ethic that no one lacks and nor overdose. It means we need to understand everyone in my community need food, but we need to share. Some people share banana, other people share yuca, guava, and other kind of fruits. In the spirituality, the Kuna community began to take ancestral medicine like inagaivid, and therapeutic singing was. And the other thing, we paint with saddur is a medicinal paint we use for protection, but also for water. The dance, ancestral dance, prayers to the Creator. For the Kuna Yala people, we understand the Creator is mother and father. And other ritual is called the La Pipa de la Paz, the Pipette of Space. I don't know if that is the pronunciation, about the imbalance in the cosmos, how we can to be, sometimes the cosmos has imbalance, we need to equilibrium the cosmos. In the social, it is often sung at the Kuna House Congress. Now we heard the ancestral song, we're listening to remind us how we have defended against the conquerors, against the animals, not because the animal is our enemy, but we live in the Caribbean parts. We have a lot of mosquito, and we need to understand better the context geographical to fight with the enemy against our people. And that's, remember that we are a people that has resisted many centuries ago. But the other thing, the health professionals, teachers, and community leaders began to transmit the necessary information about COVID-19 to our people and the prevention and hygienic action that should be taken for our language. The Dulegaye is our language. The young people in the family have been teaching to the elderly what is the pandemic means. In the summary, we try to understand better the context before to talk about prevention or to talk about proposal, because no, our people is no, we want to understand better what is our worldview and how we understand the pandemic in our context and what we are doing, because it's very important to remember our people living many centuries ago around the world, and we are fighting and we are resisting and we are still alive. And we are here, and we to embrace our ritual, our dance, our medicine, our knowledges. And then for that reason, I want to share a little about that. I don't know if you understand what I am trying to say. Great, okay. This is the context previous to talk more about the other things.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I think also goes into something that I would like to cover in this conversation, and it tags into what Charm is saying, that like so we're talking about human rights implications, but also like the indigenous rights dimensions, like how and like the COVID response of states and how it affects the rights of indigenous peoples, and what we can do as a international movement in terms of making sure that the rights of indigenous peoples are still respected during quarantine and lockdown, and also post-crisis, like Charm already said, because I think that will be very important things that we need to discuss as indigenous peoples, as an international indigenous peoples movement. Kenneth, one thing that struck me the most when the president of the United States did this whole lockdown thing of the borders of the U.S. The first thing that went through my mind was the indigenous peoples that live across borders. For example, the Yaqui people in Arizona and Mexico, but also like the Haudenosaunee. How was that? How did how did that arrive at the in your territory?
Fortunately, we had some good communication with the at least the Canadian government just before the last year, and so we had some contacts already. We've already been discussing with Canada about having free access to our homeland, whether we're in Canada or the United States, and so we had some good discussions last year. So now that the borders are being closed, we already to talk to. We had somebody to talk to at the Canadian government. So at any time somebody was given any difficulty about, then we do have we already had a process in place to make sure that our people can go can get into Canada, and also going back into the United States. We don't seem to have any kind of problems going back and forth at this time. However, like everybody else you have to have a reason to be going from Canada into the United States. You need a reason to go there. Either you live there, or you have a medical appointment, or you have something important. You're not just going for to go shopping, for instance. They won't let you they won't let you cross. So there are definitely some restrictions, but certainly we're not being restricted just because we're indigenous. The one of our communities, Agwisasne, is on both sides of the border. Part of it is in the United States, part of it is in Canada, and they have a particular situation. And right now, from what I understand, after a little bit of a rough start about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think things are going pretty smoothly right now with our people going back and forth, as long as you live in that community. If you're outside the community, then it's a different matter. It's like all the communities that are locked down everywhere. In our community in Kahnawake, which is like 30 miles away from the border, we have signs up in access roads saying that non-residents are not welcome at this time. So we need that. That's necessary for us, and because we don't want infected people from outside the community coming inside and infecting our people, and it causes some issues. But however, we've had to stop people from coming in because they come in here looking. They want to shop in our stores, but our stores are just as closed as their stores are. But they think that because we're Indian Reserve, we think our stores are open, but we're not. So now our peacekeepers are ticketing non-indigenous people coming into our territory, coming into our community. If they're knocking on the doors of closed stores, and we have to ticket them. $1,500 a ticket a pop into our community. So after a few tickets went out, it's been very successful. But the border issue seems to be working itself out very well so far. For instance, we have in Kahnawake, we have iron workers that work in New York City on high steel, and they come home on the weekend. But the understanding is that when they do come home, they have to isolate themselves into their homes until they go back to work. So that's been working quite effectively. I think a lot of the work has been shut down, so they're not working as much, and the guys are either staying here or they're staying in New York. But access across the border seems to be going okay as far as I can tell.
Oh, okay, that's good to hear. Charm, back to you, and correct me if I'm wrong, because if you put all the government's responses right next to each other or rank them in one order, a lot of people seem very favorable to how Prime Minister Ardern has been handling the situation. Like, I'm not very intimate in how she did it, so please enlighten us in if is she doing a good job, or how she's doing, and how if the rights of the Maori people are still respected in this sense.
I think what I'm going to say might be a bit controversial to people, but I'm just going to say it anyway. I think overall, the response of my Prime Minister has been really good. Our country's been in lockdown now for 19 days, no, 20, either of those. And we have kind of shortened the curve, or whatever they want to call it. But I think that this has been a really good time for our Prime Minister to have potentially spoken up for our Māori and Pacifica communities in New Zealand. I mean, again, while the rest of the world looks at us, we still aren't in most of those decision-making processes that are affecting us. If you look at our tangihanga processes at the moment. So a tangi is our funeral processes that are carried out by us. And, we have a lot of the whānau that gather together to mourn. And there were sanctions that were put on that. And again, it was kind of almost like they didn't trust that we could still have our processes and carry out the 2 meter distance rules and stuff. So that, to me, as a Māori person, I see that is not us being able to exercise our rights to self-determination. And we have a Treaty of Waitangi which clearly sets out those rights that are inherent. We're born with them. So on issues like that, I see that potentially my my Prime Minister could be a bit more vocal about, because we do live in a very progressive government, and I think we have a vehicle and as a tool to be leaders to the rest of the world, to other states. But I still feel that my Prime Minister is very quiet on those issues, and that's very upsetting. Mm-hmm. And I think another point that I wanted to raise, like especially talking about the different tribes and nations that are closing off their borders, a lot of the rural communities and different iwi and hapu throughout New Zealand took on initiatives from the beginning. Like, we were asking for, testing kits and things like that, but it was really, really slow on the uptake. And people were kind of in society were looking at us like, oh, like, again, it's just like they're just being dramatic and things like that. But I think the actions of our people have been very strong and have kind of stopped the spread going as far as it has. But again, that goes back to us practicing our self-determination. And I think at the moment we have certain iwi around the country and hapu who've got these stops in check, and the police have been really relaxed about it, right? So right now you're kind of looking at, we're both on the same level, like the state and some of our tribes and our iwi. But what happens when the state starts to lift those sanctions and wants things to, progress forward? But what if we don't want to do that? Those are going to be issues and things that we're going to have to navigate through, because again, if they don't allow us to manage our lands how we want to, that's not them letting us exercise our self-determination. So I have real big, it's the state versus us. So I don't know, thoughts around that. And sorry, I'm just looking, I wrote some things. Yeah, I think it's all about political will here. So it's, I think about these things a lot.
No, thank you. Can I backtrack you a little bit? Because can you explain the Treaty of Waitangi for people that do not know what that particularly entails?
So our Treaty of Waitangi was a document that was signed by some chiefs around New Zealand. There was an English version called Treaty of Waitangi, and then there's Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, those are the rules that were given. Well, they weren't given to us. We already had these rules, but essentially, in Article 2 of the treaty, there is rangatiratanga, right? And rangatiratanga can't be like properly, translated into English, but it's kind of like sovereignty. And for us, we never gave that away. It was, you can come here to govern your people, but we keep that right to our rangatiratanga. And the Crown were our treaty partners, so our rights were already set out. And there are other articles, but that right to self-determine was always there, like they were already pre-existing. So now, as we move through this process, a lot of iwi, a lot of hapu throughout New Zealand, again, are asking the government to honour those rights. And that's why, while I was bringing it up before, when we look at post-COVID responses, I think our example here in Aotearoa is we're using all of our mechanisms across the board. So whether people are in education, the justice system, health, you name it, we're advocating and holding our government to account that you need to include us, like through consultation, and make sure that we are the centre stage when any type of decision is made. So that's why when we're looking at post-COVID responses, we, I think, have a lot that other people from around the world can learn from us. This is, I guess, the issues that we face aren't new, but now it's just going to be heightened. So for us, our action and our tool is to hold the government accountable and make sure they honour the rights that are set out in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. That's as simple as I can say it.
No, I appreciate it. I think it's very good for people to like put the Maori case in the context of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, so that they know what it actually is. So thank you so much for explaining that. So a question that I have for every one of you is that, so like segueing into like more into deeper discussions on what Charm wanted to talk about, and Kenneth as well. So what did you think about the responses of the UN? So I've seen some statements that have been drafted by the MREP. I think the Permanent Forum has made a dedicated page and compiled everything that is indigenous related. Any first thoughts on the responses of the UN in terms of maintaining, trying to maintain that high level of human rights?
Who are you addressing?
Any one of you.
Okay, I haven't really read all those statements that I guess are on the UN site, and but I can guess what they say. And I think the world pandemic is something so unusual, something that we're not used to, at least at this level. We've had Ebola, and we've had others that were sometimes a bit more regional than global, and so I think the world organization is really reeling from this pandemic. I think I get the feeling that that the United Nations is really hamstrung because it's supposed to be a participatory instrument where people gather, states and others can gather and debate and work on issues and develop international standards, etc. And but now that can't happen. When people can't gather, a large organization like the United Nations really seems to be crippled. The statements that were put out, I'm sure, are encouraging and encouraging people to to take precautions to make sure they don't spread the COVID-19 and that everybody stays healthy. And also at the same time that the human rights of indigenous peoples also are protected and not eroded, and that this pandemic is not used as an excuse by states to undermine the rights of peoples, not just indigenous peoples, but all peoples. And you can see you can see that in some countries where I guess some states are being a little bit more aggressive than others in trying to restrict people's rights, in a sense that it's understandable that some rights have to be restricted at this time. However, some of the concern is that states, the powers that the states are enforcing now will not expire when the pandemic is over. And those extra powers that states have given themselves will be applied on into the future, and that's a danger for all people, including indigenous peoples. Like I said earlier, the whole idea of this whole idea that extractive industries, pipelines can continue to be construction, ignoring the social distancing regulations that the rest of us have to follow. Yet these companies can continue to exploit indigenous lands without restraint, with less restraints now that indigenous peoples are practicing social distancing. So we're at a disadvantage. So as a world organization, I think they have to do their job and their due diligence to make sure that the extractive industries are not violating the rights of indigenous peoples, either their land rights or their right to self-determination. And they have to be vigilant. And I don't know how they can do that. I really don't know. But but I think the agencies and the UN has to do something to make sure that our rights are not permanently eroded or even temporarily eroded. And how they're going to do it now, and whether they can follow through on it later when the UN gets to be more active again, is a question. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we hold the United Nations feet to the fire to make sure that the rights of indigenous peoples are going to be reinforced when all this is over.
Appreciate it. Do you know whether the indigenous peoples, and I'm not talking about the indigenous mandates like the MREP or the Permanent Forum or the Special Rapporteur, but indigenous peoples as in the movement or organization.
I lost you. Ghazali, I can't hear you.
Now it should be fine, and maybe it's better that way, because that was a stupid question that I was about to ask.
Well, you sounded great.
And now trying to get that stupid question out of my head. And oh yeah, Charm, take it away. Like, what do you want to talk about?
I think one thing that I guess I've been thinking a lot is all of these different UN bodies and lots of other bodies, because there's many different acronyms that I'm still learning, is the issue of balancing our rights against everybody else. Because, you know, as more things arise with COVID at an international... Did I change? No, there we go. I think we're going to have to be very mindful of our rights going to get pushed down against other rights. So I don't know. I'm just thinking of, I think what I'm trying to say is like having equity within all of this, because once everybody else starts to come to the UN and talk about the different things that are affecting them, where are we going to be placed in all of this? And what are all of these bodies going to do to, you know, uphold their obligations to us? So yeah, I guess that's as far as I can take that point. I think it's just something to be mindful about. And I guess it's utilising all of the people, like the indigenous people and our allies that we have in all of these organisations. That's why this time is really important, that we continue to... I think it was yesterday on the call, somebody was talking about the, you know, doing all these Zoom calls and stuff like that. Now we need to be mobilising within those organisations to make sure that our priorities are at the front. I'm not saying that other rights aren't important, but again, just like in our own national states, our voices might get lost with lots to come afterwards. So I think using this time wisely. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. One thought that went through my mind when you were talking just now, Charm, was what you see, and this the last couple of weeks I've been reading up on a lot of papers and statements and webinars that people are organizing, which are mostly about like tips for making self-quarantine indigenous, or how these peoples are at risk, but there's no guidance on how to respect these peoples whilst imposing this lockdown, whilst in quarantine. And I think having seen that, having read all those documents, also the conversation that we had yesterday, for example, that then we should be making use of platforms like these and like Zoom and everything else to start talking about like how like the indigenous rights dimension of things. Like we always look at the human rights dimension of things, not we, but like for example the UN, the High Commission for Human Rights. She did a conference call, and there was a statement was put out, and indigenous people's rights were mentioned, but it was a very abstract mentioning reference to the rights of indigenous peoples, or indigenous peoples, not even the rights of indigenous peoples. And to me, one thought that went through my mind was like, that is something that we as indigenous people should be advocating for. So not just a human rights, making sure that the human rights dimension is protected in the COVID-19 response by states, but also the indigenous rights dimension of things. So yeah, those are quickly my thoughts. Is that a little bit in line in what you said, Choram, or are you taking me to town for that? Like,
No. I definitely agree with that, and I think this is just me thinking, like, as you know, totally might be a bit off topic. But
I've been doing that the whole time. Sorry.
No, I think of all of the past work that has been paved by all of the brothers and sisters in the world who've got us to this point at the UN. And I think of our ancestors who have, fought many battles on their own land. And I think now, I don't have all the answers or the ideas, but I'm thinking coming out of COVID, this is going to be a different world that we're all going to be living in. I think that this time period has made people globally think about what it is, what's their purpose, and what's their why of being in this world. And I think, obviously, a lot of our international events that we would all go to, so like the Permanent Forum right now, I think we have to start thinking about how can we use these tools differently now. We need to be thinking about it more. I'm not saying more innovative ways, but how can we do things differently to make a strong impact? Like a lot of our youth around the world who are indigenous, they're doing a lot of cool things, and I think we just need to think about how to do things differently. That doesn't sound very good, but I'm just trying to say that it's a time for refreshment. And if you look at our earth, we call the earth Papatua Nuku here in New Zealand, and like many other indigenous people around the world, I think that this situation is when I say this, it's like a gift that Mother Nature has given us to give us the tools to recoup and really drive that torch to, I think, make things better and stronger for our people. I realize I just went off into a rant, but that's what I'm, yeah.
Hey, it's tea time, so you can just say whatever you want and however you want it. Jocabed, any thoughts on this or anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Yes, thank you. I think about how, like Panamanian government in Panama, when the pandemic is beginning, we don't have really a specific plan for indigenous communities. Because when they explain about what's mean pandemic, what's mean COVID-19, just they speak in the Spanish language. And then the majority is our people, elders, they are not speak Spanish, we speak our own language. I think that's very important for the government, Panamanian government, to work together with indigenous community, with indigenous nation, and how understand better what mean pandemic, what mean COVID-19, how we can to be together to strong. And that happened because our countries, in the majority of in Latin America, we don't have a pluripolitical. We are only, I don't know how do you say when it's monolithic? No, monolithic is only one kind of government with the other nation inside to the states. I don't know how do you call that, but the crisis, the crisis around the world is only we can see what happened really inside our communities, because when we want to work together with other nation inside to this nation, we understand we don't have a pluripolitical proposals for our people. For another way, we need to strong better our social, political, like indigenous people, how we can work together, not only like my people, like Kuna people, how we can work together like indigenous people in Panama and like indigenous people around the world. I think it's very important to understand the language and dynamic down to the language, because it's not because you speak one language, it's how you can explain this language in the heart of the language. I don't only speak about if you understand my language. I speak about our worldview, how we feel, and how we understand better the realities in our context. The Panamanian indigenous moving at the city, we have a lot of struggles because we are outside to the territories. But we are outside. We are outside because we came to the city to look job or to study, And then now, the reality is for indigenous Kuna people, we live around 20 people in one house. And that's normal for us because we are very communities. But when in this kind of crisis, when we need to separate, how do you call it, distance, social distance, we have social distance. And you say, one brother and sister, you need to have a social distance. We don't understand what it means, a social distance, because we never do that before. Another way, if we have small houses and you say you need to stay 2 meters, 2 meters maybe is outside to the house. That's a really problematic for us. And I think that's thing we need to think in more. And for me, the other proposal for my people, we are working very hard about that, is to have a sovereign, food sovereign. How do you say that? Food sovereign? Yes, because now we understand maybe we have money, but it's the supermarket or the economic crisis for the capitalism and neoliberalism is down. The indigenous people, when we understand better our relation with the earth and we planting, we understand better how we can renew with Mother Earth and how the Mother Earth, what the Mother Earth tell us in this moment. We need to hear very, very carefully what the Mother Earth telling us in this kind of situation. But we need to have a deep relation with the Mother Earth, and we need to work together with the earth about the sovereign food. I think it's very important to have intercultural ways about medicine. Our people has a medicine from ancestor medicine, but the Jewish people, some of Jewish people in Kuna people study medicine, and now we can have intercultural. We can talk together what we are going to do in this moment. But if we are working separate, if I am professional from Western professional and I am professional for Kuna side, and we cannot, we not put together our knowledge, maybe we are going to be a struggle. But I think we need to working together and to understand better how we are going to do, not for this moment, for the life. I don't know. I try to explain. I don't have a Spanish Google Translate for you now. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask her, how are our Kuna brothers and sisters doing? Are there many infections, or what's the situation, the health situation of the Kuna?
We have two situations. In our territory, we have around 18 people have COVID. It's not a lot. In the outside to Kuna territory, our people live in Kuna communities at the city. It's a Kuna communities at the city. We have many, our brothers and sisters, infection. But that happened because in the city, we have many infections that the other territories. But the other way, because in the city, we live in small houses together, and in Kuna communities, the infection is running very fast. That's the situation, but that's the answer. I don't know, Kenneth, did you understand what I am trying to say?
Well, that's fine. I totally understand. I've been to Kuna Yala 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was there, and it was a very, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's like Hawaii without the commercialism, you know. It was very beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Everybody's still healthy in the Mohawk territory in the Haudenosaunee, Kenneth?
Where's my microphone? There it is. Okay. Well, you know, there are a number of Haudenosaunee communities both in Canada and the United States. Here in my community, we're very independent here. We assert our jurisdiction here, We have our own task force, COVID-19 task force, and we decided when to close our schools, when to close the businesses, and we, we, as much as possible, we practice social distancing and insisting that people who have left, who come back from New York, for instance, have to self-quarantine, etc. So we have a very effective organization here, and the community is very, very much, participate and respecting it. Although, of course, like in any community, we have some people who think that the rules don't apply to them. However, we understand. We have our own hospital here. We have nobody in the hospital has COVID-19. We have tested only 135 people, and out of the 135, 12 have been. We know that were infected, and some of those have already, been cured already, have recovered. So we don't have anybody in serious health condition. So we're in my community. I think we're doing very, very well. Myself and my wife, we're not allowed out of the house. Our children do all our shopping for us, and so we stay home.
Mhm.
The other communities, Aguizasne, which is on both sides of the border, they're in a similar situation, and we can't even go visit each other. We can't even go visit each other's community. Six Nations is a very big community, about 20,000 people there, and they have a number of people who are ill, but they've closed up the access roads to their community to try to prevent outsiders from coming in. And I don't know the numbers, the figures over there, but they have a number of people that have been infected. I don't know if anybody has died there. I can't say for sure. So we try to assert our own jurisdiction and our own way of doing things. A lot of people, our medicine people, of course, are encouraging us how to use our traditional medicines to strengthen our immune systems. And we don't have a medicine to fight the COVID-19, but we do have medicines to strengthen ourselves, and people are using that, and we encourage other people to use their traditional medicines. So I think in a nutshell, I think that's the situation we find ourselves over here.
Oh, appreciate it, Kenneth. I have one comment though that just came in from Hawaii after your comment of about Hawaii. It's from Josh Cooper. You can see it, like so. It's depends on the islands. That's what he says about like.
Well, right now we're all islands. every community. I've been saying that Ganawage, my community is an island right now. And surrounded by there's 3.5 million non-indigenous people in our area. Outside, the city of Montreal is very close to us. So we feel like that we're an island surrounded by non-indigenous people, and I think many of us feel that way.
Yeah. So it's also something that was like before everyone, Canada, for example, went into lockdown. Like we had the whole situation at the Wet'suwet'en Nation area, and like there was a lot of solidarity from the First Nations in Canada. Knowing that everyone is in the has to be in their own bubble. Like how is I'm basically asking, how is the situation right now?
Are we talking about Wet'suwet'en?
Yeah, because
my understanding is the situation. Like I said earlier, the pipelines are still being pushed through the Wet'suwet'en territory. The construction continues, which has got the people very upset. The man camps are still exist, and they don't seem to be too concerned about the COVID-19, and they're continuing their construction. And the indigenous people can't they can't gather and protest because of social distancing, and also they can get arrested. They'll be arrested if they if they try to protest to stop the pipeline. We understand that there is a draft memorandum of understanding between the Kenyan government and the Wet'suwet'en chiefs, and I think they've gone through a process among the Wet'suwet'en to approve that MOU, but I don't know where they are in their process at this time. All I know is that they're quite upset that the construction is continuing unabated. They felt that that's a danger to the health of everybody, that the workers are still continuing to operate.
Thanks for update, Kenneth. Because I think most of the people most Indigenous people were very aware of what was going on over there, and I think we send a lot of positive vibes and support and good thoughts to the people that are there, and hopefully that that once we get out of all this, that we can continue to show our support. There is a question that has been that's coming in over the comment section, and I would like all three of you to share your thoughts on that. And so basically the question is it something that we should be looking at to share traditional knowledge on treating COVID-19? I know it's not necessarily like human rights or indigenous rights.
Traditional knowledge is held by those of tradition. I think it's up to the people themselves to decide how they use their medicines and how they use their teachings. It's not for the Mohawks can't tell the Kuna how to use their medicine, or the Maori. I think it's everybody else's decision on how they want to use and share that knowledge.
That's a really interesting question. I think exactly what Kenneth said. It's not up for us to decide how other Indigenous people want to use their traditional knowledge, but I think if there are situations where different communities are offering to help treat people with their medicines or whatever it is, I don't pretend I know anything about those kinds of things. Like rongoa Māori is a lot to do with like health things in New Zealand with like people who practice it, and I think it's purely up to the individual. But then again, it's like if we're going to be giving that knowledge out, there are people that will take that and abuse that knowledge and make it their own. So I think those are definitely balances that you have to weigh up. But especially moving forward into the future, I think with a lot of the stuff that here in New Zealand that we already have going on with our practitioners who do a lot of things with rongoa Māori, like this might be a time to help within the economy. But again, that's a question that's going to have to be had in each different, like rohe is like an area in New Zealand, so it's not going to be the same for every single Māori person or the same for any other Indigenous person. Yeah.
Jocabed, any thoughts?
I need to say this. I understand really good. The question is about if we are sharing the traditional knowledge, or if we want, or we can.
I think the question is whether Indigenous peoples, like for example, if the Kuna have a and I'm just assuming, right? I don't know what you really meant with the question, but like reading the question, I assume that is like if the Kuna have a treatment for COVID-19, should they be sharing it with the Maori people or the Sami in North Scandinavia?
Yeah, I think we have a prevention medicine for COVID. We are drinking Jocabed. This is a very traditional drink, very ancestral. And we can sharing with other indigenous people, because it's not only sharing, it's understand what happened in the ritual, what happened in the whole body, what happened, spiritual worldview. When we understand the other indigenous people, is they understand because we are in the same way, we can share it with them. The issues or the problem is when the people doesn't understand what happened with the medicine, what happened with the plants, what happened with the song, what happened in the ceremonies, not only with drinking this kind of medicine. It's all rituals. It's very important to understand the importance of this kind of medicine, the importance to relation with the plants, the important to relation with the elders, the important relation with the Baba, Nana, the creators, the important relation all everyone. And I think my people sharing with other indigenous people because we understand very, very deep this kind of relation.
Mm-hmm.
The question is yes, is we can share with other indigenous community because we have many kind of medicine, but the other thing we have medicine in our geographical territories because it's very important what we have in our environment. That's the environment, what we have in our territories, what we have with what the Mother Earth gives us to healing our bodies.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you so much. Charm, go ahead.
I've just been thinking about the concept of traditional knowledge and taking it away from like a medical kind of aspect. A lot of the things that we've been doing in like Aotearoa are like forms of our tikanga, which are like how we govern ourselves. And so I guess even that's a form of us practicing our traditional knowledge because that's how we're continuing to keep our communities safe by putting in place the lahui and other forms like that. And I think it's really interesting. I think when we're looking at it from this perspective, I think states and other non-Indigenous people actually have a lot to learn. But I think whether we share that again is up to Indigenous people themselves. But I think others can learn a lot from us, and especially how, we're in tune with our environment and we know how to look after our environment, and therefore that's kind of, replicated in how we do things. Yeah, that's something that I'd like to talk about more in the future. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I think like if you I think that particular question has several layers of it, and I think if you like strip down the whole question and like refer back to or like link it to the conversation that we're having, like how can we empower one another to use traditional knowledge or the knowledge, our own knowledge, to fight COVID-19. I don't like to use the wording traditional knowledge, by the way, mostly because it is a concept that is not us. So maybe a quick sidestep. Is traditional knowledge the right way to describe our breadth of knowledge?
I'm going to jump in there. I think every different culture throughout the world has their own way of expressing that. I don't necessarily think that's the right way to say it, like you were just saying yourself. But I think it comes from like in here, and it's what you feel and what it is that your people have done for centuries. It's your way of being, it's your way of doing things. I don't think any kind of other term could quite encapsulate that. So again, I can only speak of me being a Maori, but that's tikanga. So whatever it is for anybody else is going to be different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to articulate in English language some of the concepts that are, in an indigenous culture. But traditional knowledge is a term that's used a lot, I guess, internationally, and it's a better term than folklore, because that's what the United Nations has been using. Like UNESCO was using folklore, all right, and that sound and at least traditional knowledge in climate change, they recognize that traditional knowledge is science, and I think that's important, and that raises the I guess the value of traditional knowledge when the United Nations recognizes that as a science. So I think traditional knowledge is a word that has a lot of value and it is useful. Unless somebody can come up with a better word that can be universally be applied, traditional knowledge seems to fit at this time.
Where did that word come from, by the way? Is that something that we introduced as a movement, or is it something that the UN came up with?
I can't answer that question. I don't
well,
know.
you have the knowledge to know. But
I think traditional knowledge came out of the WIPO process, mostly the intellectual property organization process. I think that's maybe where it came from, but it could have come from our own people. I wouldn't surprise me if it came out of our own people when we were drafting the first draft of the declaration in the 1980s.
Okay.
The traditional knowledge is in the declaration, and it's been there since the beginning. And so that term has been there for you're looking at how many now? 35 years, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So I like to use, and Jocabed, what do you think about it? I like to use the knowledge of indigenous peoples. Is that something that is good, or should I uppercut myself?
Could you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, the uppercut thing. With a lot of people. So because we're talking a little bit about traditional knowledge now. That is a concept that right now is being used throughout the UN, which is now also in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to capture the breadth of knowledge that we have. But in my view, it is, and Charm and what Kenneth said, it does not necessarily cover what it means, like according to us. So what I use, at least in my conversations with state representatives and negotiators and everything else, is that I like to use knowledge of indigenous peoples. So my question is, is that better to you and everybody else, of course? Is that better, at least in terms of conversation and describing the knowledge of our knowledge, or should I just shut up and stay with traditional knowledge?
If you're asking me that question, then knowledge of indigenous peoples is fine. I think adjectives. When you add adjectives in front of the word, like traditional knowledge, it could be interpreted differently. Just like indigenous rights could be interpreted differently from human rights. When you add words in front of something, when you add adjectives, it can take on a different meaning. I always have issues with the term indigenous peoples in the sense that yes, we're different, but we're first and foremost we're peoples, period, who happen to be indigenous. And it's important to say things that way every now and again to make sure that we understand that as people, we are peoples just like equal to all other peoples. And what the difference between us and others is that we happen to be indigenous. The first peoples of the land. So we're not peoples because we're indigenous. We're peoples, period, who happen to be indigenous.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It's like
Okay.
our thought. Jocabed, go ahead.
Yeah. I agree with Kenneth about the word in English or Spanish is not really very near from our words in our own language. And that happens when we have to translate to Franco language. We lose a lot about what's the meaning, as about our medicine, our rituals, our dance, because it's not, sometimes traditional knowledge is when we understand that in our people, it's homogenization, our I don't know how to say another word in English, we homogenization our knowledge. It's like our own knowledge is the same, but we know our knowledge is not only one knowledge; it's several knowledge about several topics. And sometimes we know some knowledge, and our elders know more knowledge, more other thing about this kind of knowledge. We have in our nature we have several people to know different things, like singers, like medicines, like plants, like around about the land, other things. For that reason, I think we need to problematize this word, because it's very important what's meaning for us really. What's meaning traditional knowledge? Is meaning medicine, is meaning ritual, is meaning sing, is meaning what? And another thing I think is we need to understand better what our people understand for knowledge. Because for Western culture, they separate knowledge for I don't know, in Spanish, it's like a saberes y conocimientos. I don't know how do you say this in English, what is different. And for when you read papers about that, you but the people when read this paper, they think this is better than the other because it's different words. But I think it's very important to have this kind of problematization, this kind of work with our people, with our elder, with our ancestor, with our people, because maybe it's not the transmission to this word is not really what we want to say in our language. Another way I think is very important to understand the etymological of our language, what's meaning a lot of our words. I think the question is very important. I don't have an answer for that, but I think we need to continue to talk about that, because we need to think about what is the meaning about that and how we use that, what the other people understand when we use this word, and what our people understand when we are use this word. Because in my community, we never use that traditional knowledge. we don't use this word. This word is used more in political conversations, but our people, the name for our ritual, our medicine, our singer with these own names, and this meaning a lot.
No, thank you. Charm, go ahead.
So I've just been listening to everybody's conversations around traditional knowledge, and I guess with all of the themes over the last couple of weeks that all of us have each had with one another, potentially maybe this is something that we need to think about, like I don't know if you'd call it a strategy or some kind of way that in these upcoming conferences that, well, I don't know if they'll be this year at the end of the year or early next year, potentially when it comes to post-COVID responses, maybe we need to all sit down together, and I don't know how to do all of this. This is, again, just ideas. Potentially we need to come together and think about how each one of our own traditional knowledge, I'm going to use those two words, how we can apply that in a post-COVID context and how that could apply to other IP people around the world and could help, I guess, shape, these things. I think I totally just went off tangent again, but I was thinking, how can we have these discussions and turn it into something that's going to be workable that all of us could benefit from? Because there's a lot of ideas being thrown around, but I think if we're, together in those kinds of spaces, it gives us an opportunity to mobilize. Because again, we already know what the UN is like, and I think many of us use it as a tool. Like the brother Brandon the other day was talking about, we go to the UN and we use it as a platform. So I think potentially we could use this COVID situation as another way to talk about our traditional knowledge, but how, and obviously we'd have to go through consultation where we're all from with our people, but to talk about how that traditional knowledge can actually help our people, but also probably benefit a lot of the rebuilding of certain things in society after this. Because the reality is after this is I guess, quietened down a bit, it's still going to be affecting us. So I'm just constantly thinking of how can we make action out of this and utilizing these different events for different things, you know? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, Charm. And while you're saying that, and also talk about like post-crisis, let me ask. Sorry, Kenneth, I'm going back to you again. Like, if I'm segueing to like the post-crisis things and thinking about like the government's responses to COVID-19 and how their responses can respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. My question is like, do you know that of Indigenous peoples, for example, in Canada, of First Nations or Métis or Inuit that communicate with the government in terms of like how they should respect the rights of Indigenous peoples? Is there like a conversation? Is there a document, or is there a checklist that has been given? Something along those lines?
Well, in Canada, the relationships with Canada and Indigenous people, is complicated. But there are in the current government, there are many avenues to talk to the government about Indigenous peoples, about Indigenous rights. The current Prime Minister has said that the relationship with Indigenous people is the most important relationship that Canada has to deal with. And of course, there are a lot of nice words in that, but in reality, though, we're still fighting a tremendous legacy of colonialism in Canada and assimilationist policies, and so there is open dialogue, I would say, with the government. However, there's very, very deep suspicion coming from our side about the eventual goal of the Canadian government, which we believe is to the assimilation of Indigenous people, the eventual disappearance of Indigenous people in the long term, and so we're very cautious and we're tepid about, I guess, about the discussions, because we have our own policy analysts and if you look at the fine print, which you really have to do when you're dealing with any government. You got to look at the fine print and see where this is all headed in 100 years from now. Where are we going to be in 100 years from now? Not just 5 years or 10 years, but 100 years from now. And so when you look at the policies of the Canadian government, and with that lens, you can very see that the government eventually wants to get out of the Indian business, so to speak. And so we're cautious with that. But to your question, is there discussions? Yes, there are discussions, a lot of discussions, and you can discuss as much as you want with the Canadian government. Whether you're going to get a good result out of all of that, though, is still the big question mark. And what will be the outcome at the other end? In my estimation, I'm not pessimistic. I'm realistic. And I think that because we're a numeric minority and because of the colonialism, I think we're going to be struggling for a long time. And we have to raise our children to struggle. And that if you stop struggling, then you'll disappear. Then there won't be Mohawks anymore if Mohawks stop struggling. I think if we get too comfortable, I think you'll see us fade away and just become Canadians of Mohawk descent. And so I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I think that we have to, in order to survive, we will always be struggling.
Yeah. I think, like, yes, you answered my question, but I think like the first part of your question was, sorry, I have a cough, but it's no corona. I'm telling you, it's no corona. What was I trying to say? Yes, like the first part of what you said, and that struck me as that could very well happen. That governments can use this global pandemic and lockdown and quarantine as a excuse or a vehicle to loosen the government in the state indigenous relationship. I think that, and that's something that we need to be very aware of like keep in mind and be very, very vigilant about. And well, that's a statement. Then it should be following with a question. Like, yeah, how can we make sure that, or how can we monitor that? How can we, as a movement, as indigenous individuals, how can we, monitor that they're not backtracking the government, the state indigenous relationship, if you can even talk about any relationship, by the way, but making sure that we're not, basically what I'm trying to say is that we're not losing whatever we have achieved or what do we have before lockdown and before COVID, and that whatever comes out of COVID, that it's after COVID-19, that is not, like way, like 4 or 5 steps backwards. Does that make any sense? Sorry, Charm.
Again, I think going back to the very beginning and what everybody's already touched on, we already have experts in our communities who are tracking all of these things across a number of different areas. And I think what I'm trying to say is, given the technology that we have to be able to connect with one another right now, I think it's important that, I don't know if somebody created like a database or some type of thing where we can be inputting all of that information on different things that are happening. So like there's like a track record for all of us in our different regions. I think that's really important, because whatever happens after this, we can see what it is happening for everybody else. Like I know people put out statements, and different UN agencies, whatever you want to call it, they put out statements. But I think us on the ground, we need to be doing that ourselves and working regionally together. So reporting on different things, and so we can kind of see where everybody's at. I know a lot of us share information between ourselves, but I think maybe a more structured approach needs to happen so we can manage that and use it for something else in the future. And I guess, again, people who live in, I don't like using that terminology, like first world countries who aren't going to face prosecution and things like that. How can, and this goes to everybody watching, I know a lot of us work in different government spaces and lots of different areas. So how can we, to people watching and who might be afraid to speak out because of things that might happen in their country, how can we use the tools that we have now to speak out and be a voice? Keeping in mind our own obligations to our own people, but I also think it's important that if we have Indigenous people in all of these other areas, that we need to be constantly raising Indigenous people, constantly, because again, this time is really precious, so we need to utilize it. And I don't pretend to know that I know how to organize people, but I mean, that's something that I would like to see with, I guess, things that people are tracking. So I'm quite happy to start something. I don't know how to do any of that, but I'll take it. I just think it's really important for us to be doing that right now, because again, like I said at the beginning, this is a period of time where other agendas are going to be pushed. And again, it goes back to human rights issues, and the rule of law. And I'm just scared that we're going to be affected in ways that we probably can't imagine right now. So yeah, another blur, but.
No, thank you so much. There's a question that just came in from the current president of the Sami Parliament in Finland. He asked, Tuomas Aslak asks if there are any positive efforts from governments due to COVID-19, specifically towards IPs. So we're talking about negative things, but there are do we know of any positive things that have been developing or have developed?
Well, if I can answer from, I guess there are some in Canada, I can say that there are the Canadian government has promised millions of dollars to help Indigenous peoples in vulnerable places, and also to help the economy, to get us help us with some food sovereignty issues and stuff. So the government in Canada has come up with some safety net, I guess, for Indigenous people. I don't want to call them advancements, or they're certainly not rights oriented. I would say, but these are like stopgap measures to help Indigenous people. To get back to the other question, though, I think that Indigenous peoples have to realize how vulnerable we are to COVID-19 and others, whatever come after. And it reminds us of, in our case, smallpox at the time of European contact, and influenza, Spanish flu, etc., and that attack all of humanity, but in particular how vulnerable we are to these things, and also how dependent we are on outside medicines and help in dealing with these issues. Talking about also the material, masks and clothing, etc., for our first line workers. So I think that if Indigenous people learn anything from this, we have to try to be less dependent on the government and outside governments as much as possible. Right? We can't prevent future pandemics, but what we can do is be better prepared for the next pandemic when it comes. That we do have the resources and the things in place that we can do a better job of protecting our people and preventing outside diseases from infecting our communities. I think if anything, we learn anything or we should relearn what we probably learned in the past pandemics, and that we shouldn't forget those lessons. And so that we can be better prepared in the future to be less dependent on the outside governments in these kind of situations.
Thank you, Kenneth. Jocabed, you moved to a different space, so you wanted to say something?
Yeah. My battery, it was gone. I need to move. Well, the government, I think the positive thing the government is doing in my country is they are working together with the Kuna doctors. They want to understand better what happened in Kuna Yala, because the reality from Kuna Yala is different for the other province in Panama. Not only because geographical, because we are nation inside to other nation. And then we have now, we are talking about what is going to happen about the prevention, what's going to happen about if people has a lot of infection, what we are going to do. But the thing is, they are working for all country, but I think besides they are working with our Kuna doctors, we need to improve better our understanding what happened in our nation about the pandemic, because I say earlier, the worldview is very different from the Panamanian, from the city. The other thing I think the government is doing is they provide some food for some persons, but not really for the Kuna people in our islands. The Kuna government, we don't call Kuna government like that, but our Congress, they are working very hard how we can provide food. And then because we have we have sea and lands, we looking the food from the land. I think that it's a good question because we need to thinking better what the government doing for us in this kind of crisis. But I think the thing they are doing is more medical things, like provide medicines and helicopter if someone has very bad, if someone is in a bad situation, they can move these people from the island to the cities, or they provide some transportations.
Mm.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Jocabed. I'm trying to, because we're coming to the tail end of this this conversation. I'm trying to encapsulate a little bit and also like see what we can do as in terms of this is no way conclusion though, but it's trying to encapsulate the what we've been talking about and how as like we can translate it into actions. I think that's very important. That we're not just talking about narratives and ideas, but like how can we actually put this into something that we can all can contribute to. And I think that Charm already talked about, like we should at least keep track of what governments are doing and positive and or negative when it comes to the the responses and how it relates to the rights of Indigenous peoples. And something that struck me was in yesterday's conversation was that the ability of that we should actually should we no sorry rephrase. This is a question. Is it an idea that we as indigenous peoples, as movement or as organizations, that we come up with some sort of a checklist, like how can governments respect rights of indigenous peoples during COVID-19 and post COVID-19, come up with some sort of a checklist and attach that to a letter to the, because we're talking about High Commission for Human Rights, that she already tried to set out some guidelines and some basic ideas when it comes to respecting human rights in COVID-19 era. That we, first of all, it shows that we are proactive, that we are not here as like in a bubble and just waiting for the savior to help us, but like, well, right now, if ever there's a time, it is right now for to respect the rights of Indigenous peoples in order to be able to survive. And like outlining like so what did I write down like recommendations from Indigenous peoples or leaders to how that will be very important, like the recovery efforts from states, and how that should, not can, but should or must actually include Indigenous peoples and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. So I think that is something that went through my mind in terms of like the conversation that we had, tagging into what Charm said, Kenneth said, and Jocabed said as well. Is that an idea, or again, should I uppercut myself? Just Kenneth is anxious, so go ahead. Yeah,
I'll go first. Rights, human rights. The right to life comes to mind at first, and as Indigenous people in the Americas, we were the victims of germ warfare with the smallpox blankets when a disease was deliberately inserted into our communities. When the settlers realized how dangerous it was, and they used diseases to try to as an act of genocide on our people. And those kind of activities are not unheard of in modern times, and I don't think that we should assume that modern society won't do the same thing. I really fear for the indigenous peoples in Brazil, for instance, where we were, as you know, there's one Yanomami, I think, boy who died, and where did he get that disease from? And in isolated people, and and they're saying it's illegal miners and illegal loggers, perhaps. And people are very, very capable of deliberately inserting a deadly disease in another people, when they feel that they're in the way. And that's historic. It's been our experience, and I think we shouldn't be shy about reminding the United Nations and High Commissioner for Human Rights that this is a reality for Indigenous people who are vulnerable to these diseases, particularly the isolated, very isolated and uncontacted peoples. And I include missionaries in this category as well, who believe that they're doing the work of God. But I just wonder, missionaries can carry diseases just as much as an illegal logger or an illegal miner, a soldier, or anybody, or a businessman, or anybody else who feels that who might knowingly or unknowingly inject diseases into our Indigenous peoples. But in terms of human rights, it's the deliberate, either by deliberate, I mean that they on purpose infect Indigenous people, and also infect Indigenous people by neglect, and also particularly after a disease is introduced to a people, and to neglect them is just as much a genocide as deliberately killing and shooting them. And so I think that I guess statement or any kind of policy or state pronouncement by the High Commissioner of Human Rights has to include that the use of contagious diseases, condemn the use of contagious diseases to eliminate Indigenous peoples and to commit genocide. I think, to me, that is the worst that can happen, and I think that it's the humans are very, very capable of carrying that out.
Thanks, Kenneth. Charm? Oh, I thought you wanted to say something. Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Oh, sorry about that. Jocabed, you want to?
Yes, I think we need to continue work in different ways, to local community, how we can to get strong our political governments in our local situation, like as indigenous, but in other way, how we can work together with intercultural, not only in the knowledge, in the political and the realities in our context. Because when sometimes we hear this word interculture, it's not really what to mean really in the deed what is interculture, to listen and to understand and to know better the other nation. I think it's very important to have a specific plan for our people. A specific plan to be its meaning to know what is the care is for our people. Specific plan to understand better the situation, the worldview, the crisis, but our opportunities too. What we can learn for our people and how we can share with the government, with the other nations. I think the realities about human rights in our Latin American Navia Yala, in some countries, it's very struggle about how indigenous people living, not only because they are isolated, why they living because the political doesn't recognize really the territories, doesn't recognize really our wisdom, doesn't recognize how we can what we can do in this kind of crisis. I think it's very important to have a conversation not only like for the crisis. We need to continue to improve and to push to in our government. It's very important to listen and to have a plan for together. No, they has a plan for us. No, we need to construct, to building the plan together for whatever things. In Brazil, in Colombia, in some countries, the genocide is very strong. What happened now with our people, and in some people, some indigenous people, they don't want. Some it's we have a word in Spanish for that, but I don't know in English, about when indigenous people, they don't want a contact with other people, and some government, they want to have a contact with them, and I think that we need to continue to work together. Like indigenous people has contact with other worldview, but they don't want a contact. What mean that like genocide for them? Well, finish. I think is the political reality. If we want to understand this better, it's not only like in political and social. We need to understand. They need to understand better the medicines, the spirituality, the social issues, and what's mean territory for us. I think that is a way we can work together to continue to work together, because we're fighting in these ways, but we need to be stronger in that. I don't know if means sense what I am doing, what I am trying to say.
No, I totally understood what you said. Thank you so much for that. And I think it resonates with a lot of indigenous people, so like what you talked about, and something that we definitely should have more conversations about and go more in depth. And well, I think we'll definitely go more in depth into that on the Thursday conversation, by the way. So Jocabed, I don't know what you're doing on Thursday, but you should be in that conversation when we talk about like indigenous peoples. How can we deploy our indigenous self-protection mechanisms like food sovereignty, what you talked about, and other ways. So Charm, I think that's what you wanted to say. I think there was something that was talking about the checklist and everything else. And so I saw you doing this and this. So like,
Sorry.
what was this?
No, I definitely agree. I think us to do something at the moment is better than nothing. So if it is a statement or somehow how that comes together for us outlining, I don't know if it's a checklist or just ways, again, that come from us, not the bodies or something, like from actually us, to talk about ways that these should be upheld. I don't know how that would happen, but I'm sure there's enough of us throughout the globe who could work on something feasible and to get that out soon. Yeah, that's basically my thoughts on that, and I just support what's already been said. I can't really say anything else to that.
All
Yeah.
right. No, appreciate it. Any final thoughts or things that you haven't that you want to share, but I cut you off, or something that came up that you haven't said before?
I just want to say something. Something totally off topic. It's on topic. It's about COVID and indigenous people. Might not be about rule of law or human rights, but I just want to share some terrifying news from my Navajo friends who I got, and she wrote, and it's Janine Ghazali, you know her?
Yeah.
Yazi. She says, as of this morning, there are over 3,200 people tested in Navajo country, 813 confirmed positive, and 28 confirmed COVID deaths. Projections show that they can expect cases to rise by 160 new cases per day towards the end of the month. There are more suspected deaths, but people are dying in their homes before being tested, and there is no post-mortem tests available. So she said it's very scary in Navajo country. So I just thought I'd share that to you, because it was, and it's the shock value of that how decimated our people can can become if a disease like this gets rooted in a community and spreads, without proper health care and without proper support. So I just want to ask you to keep the Navajo people in your prayers along with your own people when the time comes. All right, thank you.
100%, Kenneth, and thank you so much for sharing that. Thoughts and prayers definitely with the Navajo people at this point, in addition to our own peoples and these peoples around the world. Charm, Jocabed, any final thoughts?
I guess I just want to say, it is very important for us to stick together during this time. I know that we're all spread throughout the world, but, we're in this together. These are some scary times, and we know, like, historically that our peoples are probably going to be facing the most toughest challenges through this. So I think whatever it is, whatever you're doing, like, we're all together, and just to have that solidarity between all of us. And, there's a reason, like, these connections that our ancestors have put us here all together to unite and help everybody. So I know that times are difficult, but just stay strong. And if anybody needs to talk, well, I'm sure you can stalk me on social media. So, yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it, Charm. Thank you.
Two things for me. One is I think we need to share more about our experience in this situation in our nations. We can to be stronger when we can listen and hear what happened in our nation, to pray to Creator, but to understand better what happened and how our people is resilient in this kind of situation. The other thing I think is very important to listen our narrative, our singers, our songs, because in our song, in our narrative, we have a lot. We can learn a lot about that, how our people resisted many centuries ago, and how we can apply this kind of narrative in this moment. I think it's very important not only to listen, to meditate, to listen, and to make a proposal confront our narrative. I know it's different, maybe the situation, but the crisis is crisis, and we can learn a lot about how our ancestors working before, and how we can apply this in this moment in our context. Well, thank you, Ghazali, for inviting me.
No, thank you. I should be thanking you, Jocabed, Charm, and Kenneth for taking the time off. Like, I know it's very early over there in Aotearoa, Charm. So thank you so much for getting up early. Kenneth, thank you so much. See, I'm talking way too much again. Thank you so much, Kenneth and Jocabed, for stepping in at the last minute. And I think it was a very good conversation that we had with a lot of good input. And hopefully that you'll stick around for like the next couple of days when we talk about more about environmental impacts and how can we help each other? I should talk faster, maybe. That's why it is. How can we help each other in deploying indigenous self-protection mechanism? And on Friday, I think we'll also touch upon like the situation that is currently developing in Navajo Nation. Well, how can we help? What can we do actually for them and for other Native people that are very much struck with this virus? I think. Like you said, Charm, Kenneth, and Jocabed, we're all in this together. That we have to social distance from each other. Like, doesn't mean that we have to be not social. We can do a lot using these platforms like these and help one another out. And hopefully, at some point after this, we can laugh about, not laugh about it, but like meet each other in person. And make jokes and have a good feed. Again, thank you so much for sticking around, for Kenneth, Charm, and Jocabed, and everyone else that was following me on YouTube and Facebook and dropping comments. Keep the conversation going. Tomorrow we'll talk about environmental impacts, and like a tip of the not a tip of iceberg, but like at least one of the guests is a SDG advocate and new Permanent Forum member, or new member to the Permanent Forum, is a Hindu Umaru Ibrahim. She will be talking, one of the guests of the conversation tomorrow. So definitely stick around for that and keep the conversation going in the comments, because that's very important. So that, like, this shouldn't be a bottleneck, but we should be creating more conversations about this. Anyway, I'm letting you go. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night. Day.
So long, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank
everybody.
you, Charles. Thank you, Kenneth.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Gasali. Bye.
Bye. Whew. All right, yeah, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I meant it. Please keep the conversation going and drop your comments and talk to people in your community about not just well, of course, promote this idea that I had, but also promote having conversation with people in your community, with your friends, allies, indigenous allies, non-indigenous allies. That we need to put the rights of Indigenous peoples and Indian peoples at the forefront, and making sure that hopefully that when we come out of this, that we're not losing any ground, and that we don't. Making sure that we use this time. Actually, we're supposed to be at the Permanent Forum right now, and everybody's bummed that we're not at the Permanent Forum. But that doesn't mean that we should not reach out to one another and and just grab your phone and text people or make a phone call. It can mean so much more to everyone, especially in these times when things are very scary for a lot of us, especially our elders and vulnerable people. And yeah, keep doing that, and also use these platforms to keep the conversation going. Not just during COVID, but also like afterwards, when we hopefully continue or resume our activities at the UN or EU or anywhere else, that we keep using these platforms to make sure that we are effective in our advocacy. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you up in the next episode. This is episode. Tomorrow, today we talked about human rights impacts and rule of law. Tomorrow we'll talk about environmental impacts. So we've seen a lot of things happening right now, and we need to talk about it, and how, for example, there's a lot of good things, positive things happening. So how can we make sure that whatever is developing positively, that we can still maintain that post COVID-19? Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and have a good day, night, morning, something. See ya.